applaus for me.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So let me start by briefly introducing myself. I'm Vadim. I did product management for over 5 years, product management and product analytics. I started as a product analyst and then moved on to product management, but I'm still an analyst at heart. I particularly succeeded in my last 2 gigs where I was driving growth using analytical approach. That was at 8Fit. That's a health and fitness app based here in Berlin. And my current engagement with Omio, which is also based in Berlin. I want to start with a quote. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. And what makes this quote special is that it was said by Sherlock Holmes in Arthur Conan Doyle's book in 1887, so way before data was cool or mainstream. So the aim of my talk today is to convince you that everybody, no matter the job title, the organization size, or industry, should be an analyst. And I'll talk about why it is important to be an analyst, what does it mean to be an analyst, and how do you empower people organizationally for all of them to become analysts. And finally, I'll also talk about what are the cases when analytics is not helpful. So let me start with why it is important to be an analyst. And there are 3 reasons, really. The first one is that most products and features fail. According to HBS study, 95% of all consumer goods that are being shipped, they do not succeed. And you might say that it is because of bad idea or poor execution. It might be bad marketing. I'll say it is all of the above, and it is because the teams that are responsible for these product releases are not actually data-driven. And this is a pretty serious accusation these days to make it, that someone is not data-driven. So let's break it down. Data-driven is a buzzword, and usually buzzwords indicate something very important, which everybody forgot the meaning for. So let's break it down. Whenever people hear the word data, they think about something like this. This is usually what comes into people's minds. This is the first thing you see in Google Images. Whereas what people should be thinking about when they hear the word data is something like this. This is something structured, something very simple, which you collect together and you make some kind of decision and later take action on it. So data is facts, it's statistics, and remembering Sherlock Holmes, data is evidence. Now, driven, indicates move or influence. So data-driven together means you want to influence something using evidence. And when I'm saying teams are not data-driven, I'm saying that their actions are not supported by evidence, and as a result, they do not fulfill their goals, and that's why 95% of products fail. So this is the first reason why it is important to be analytical. The second reason is that organizations, whether NGOs or commercial, they are just too damn slow. They are slow at decision making and they're slow at learning. And even today, these organizations use human-to-human communication approach, where the human-to-computer interaction would be a lot more appropriate. How many hours we spend explaining what happened here? When you're in a meeting and somebody presents a chart and then you see that something is going down, and this is the first time you see the chart and people ask what happened here, and then you try to get to the depth of your memory, you scratch it there and you try to remember what could you possibly do to cause this, which is a very inefficient time spent. then how many times we try to figure out how a particular feature performed, just to realize in the end that we forgot to set up the tracking, or we didn't even do the A/B test in the first place, so we can't even answer the question. Or how many hours we spend at the beginning of the quarter debating and arguing about the vision of this or that feature, showing overcrowded slides to the management to convince them of something, and then at the end of the quarter, you sit down with the same audience and you spend hours debating why your sales are not going up. So this is just a very inefficient amount of time that we're spending talking and interacting with each other, when we could actually just sit down, look at the numbers, and think. The third reason why it is important to be an analyst is that employees in the company are usually lack a sense of direction. And many of you might be working for companies, for e-commerce type of companies, or for subscription-based companies, and you would know that one of the most important metrics that you have is number of orders or subscriptions. But the fact is that for 90% of people in the company, it's like it doesn't matter. They don't actually care about this metric. And you very often find yourself in a situation where you have management in front of the audience presenting a line which indicates number of orders or subscriptions. And if the line goes up, everybody claps and gets happy and leave not sure what they're supposed to do with this. Or when the line goes down, everybody gets sad and leave not really being sure what they're supposed to do with this. And this is because usually this metric is not associated with what these people do on a daily basis. So the metric is just completely irrelevant for them. So that is another not very analytical approach that you want to take. Employees lose motivation in these cases. So now that I covered the 3 reasons why it is important to be analytical, is because products fail, organizations are slow, and employees lack a sense of direction. Let me try to explain you how to fix this first on an individual level. So how do you become an analyst? And what does it mean to be an analyst? And there are 3 factors that make you an analyst. The first one is knowing how you are doing. Quote again, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Peter Drucker, strategy guru, cliche. Hardly ever you see this in practice. If you come to an average backend engineer and you ask them, what is the uptime of the service that you've built? The answer usually will be, I don't know. If you come to the front-end engineer and you ask them, what is the page load speed of this page that you've built? And the answer usually is I don't know. If you come to any developer and you ask about the business metric, or how users are engaging with the feature that you've built, the answer most surely is I don't know. Another example from the NGO sector is this is an image from the most recent annual letter from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they have a little survey here asking how much more time do girls spend on chores than boys do. And the answer to the survey is, we don't know. And Bill later writes in his letter saying, I'm amazed at how little data we have on women and girls. You can't improve things if you don't know what's going on with half of the population. So the truth is, if you want to be good at what you're doing, you need to know how you're doing. Doesn't matter what is it that you do, whether you are a developer, a designer, customer service agent, or product manager. It might be hard, it takes effort and thinking effort to set up tracking and figure out how to build charts. But once you do that, it drives meaning into what you do. So I'll give an example from my Omio experience. I have one of the teams that are responsible for building payment stack. So all the team does effectively is from the moment the user clicks the button pay and to the moment that this payment is successfully completed, that is their responsibility. So that sounds pretty simple, but actually there is a pretty complex system behind, and Daniel might explain later on, who's working for N26. But because it looks so simple, initially, when this payment provider was integrated, there was a stagnant performance of this step for years until a year ago when we convinced the engineering team to actually start tracking and visualizing the business metrics, which would be payment acceptance rate and the cost that is associated with it, and put it on the screens. And after we did this, there was this magical thing that happened that the developers actually started caring about how to move this number up. And the ideas were not coming only from a product manager or payment operations team, so the developers would actually be actively thinking how to move this line up. And just today, I saw a developer making a presentation on this, presenting this business KPI, acceptance rate. And I don't know how often you see backend engineers presenting business KPIs, but you could see the pride in his eyes showing that this acceptance rate is going up. So that's effectively a direct impact that he is implementing by building stuff. So the second factor what makes you an analyst is supporting your actions with evidence. So now that you know how you're doing, you will be craving to figure out what should be your next action that will increase the probability that you will move your metric up. And that inevitably leads you to go and think and find those insights how to move the numbers up. And the example here would be if you're a customer service agent and you have an abstract goal of making people happy or making customers happy and making them as many customers happy as possible. That is pretty generic and abstract, and when you are day in and day out doing this, you can easily lose the meaning. Whereas if you start thinking for yourself that if I want to progress in my job and do this better and better, I can look at customer satisfaction score, for example, after I talk to a customer. Or I can look at the average amount of time I spend with a customer. And in looking at these metrics, I can improve them. And after doing this, you will very quickly realize what is it that I would need to make these metrics better. And then you realize, okay, there are certain things that I can do, but there are some other things where I would need help. So as a customer service agent, you can go to a product manager saying, hey, we have this big group of people who are really unhappy and it affects your retention. So if you help me build this, then your retention will be going up. And that is in fact what happened at Omio. We have been ignoring customer service for a very long time. There is always a lack of development resources. But ever since we got the head of customer service who was actually talking numbers and we're linking these numbers with incentives that product managers are interested in, he managed to get the development resources for a very significant amount of time. And he got a lot, and that benefited the organization as well. The third factor, what it means to become an analyst, is collecting evidence efficiently. So now, if you are convinced that you need to know your metric and build insights, you want to go and where do you start? How do you find these numbers? And the first thing that you do is you probably want to go back to your desk and see are there any dashboards available for you. And if the answer is no, then you probably want to try and see if there is anybody who can help you build that dashboard. And that's usually the step where most people give up and say, all right, there is nobody in the organization who can do it, so I'll just keep rolling. But you still want to be good at what you're doing, and you still want to progress your career, so what do? You build dashboards. Now, you need to learn how to build these dashboards, and it might sound complicated, but in fact, there are not so many steps that you need to learn. The first thing you need to learn is how to pull the data. And to pull the data, you need SQL. SQL is not hard. It's like 6 words you need to learn and move them around. You can learn them now, or you can spend a weekend on Khan Academy, and you will pretty much know how to run the queries. In a week, you will be running them pretty quickly, and in a month, you will not even understand how you lived without it, or how can anyone live without it. You can do it all yourself. You don't need to ask anybody. Once you pull the data, you need to figure out how to visualize stuff. And there are some things that you would need to learn to visualize it effectively. And there are a lot of mistakes that people make in visualization, which can be pretty critical in how you communicate what you want to get. There are 2 examples here. There is a table at the top. So if you look at the table, and that's how often companies are reporting their performance. They show a table to people, and they think that people should be able to scan it and see whether we're doing good or not. Well, in fact, you can improve this experience so much better if you just draw a line chart. And when you see you draw a line chart, you see very clear trends. You see what's going on. You build filters where people can select which exact metric they want to choose, which is really simple to do. You can learn it in a day. Or line charts is not a panacea. Sometimes line charts don't work. If you want to deliver a message saying how one group of customers is performing against the other, or if you're running an A/B test, for example, you don't want to use a line chart, because if you present a line chart, people will try to get a trend out of it. It's like really hard to see is the orange line or the blue line is performing better here. You want an aggregate metric, and you show it in the column chart, and it's super simple. You make decision, and you move on. And there are a lot of these simple techniques. There is this good book that is called Say It with Charts. Everyone who joins McKinsey as a consultant, for example, gets this book. You read it for a few hours, and it just teaches you very simple techniques that you will be applying till the rest of your career. So these are the 3 factors that makes you a good analyst. So you want to learn how you're doing if you want to be good at what you're doing, if you want to progress your career. You want to support your actions with evidence, and you want to collect evidence efficiently. So you want to learn techniques how to do it, and these techniques are very simple. Now let's move on to the next point, which is how do you empower people organizationally to become analysts. And here I have a few examples. The first example is 8fit, where founders started doing the experimentation culture very early on, without debating whether we should allocate resources to this or not. They just had experimentation culture. They had everything tracked. If at 8fit you released a feature and you didn't know certain important aspect of how people engage with this feature, people would look at you like it's a no-go. And because of this experimentation culture, I started by working on the onboarding flow optimization and just getting all the possible tricks that you can do with onboarding to increase the number of subscriptions. In a fairly short period of time, we did quite a few experiments, one of which actually was so successful that it got us to a profitability which allowed the founders to raise $7 million, which was just because we were doing this onboard flow optimization. And then within a year after that, we drove further 20% improvement purely because we had this simple infrastructure and experimentation mindset in the company. The other example would be from the larger company, Airbnb. They are famous for their experimentation framework, and it is one of those companies where VP of engineer would say early on, when we had less than 50 engineers, we already had a dedicated team running an infrastructure team responsible for experimentation framework solely. And that created this whole environment where people could just run the tests without building infrastructure themselves. And now Airbnb is a $30 billion company. Yes, they invented a pretty amazing thing, but they wouldn't be able to scale this thing if they didn't have this experimentation culture. I would like to give you an example of how you create this environment, and it's something that I call self-service analytics, or there is a general term that started appearing in the industry till now. The very good framework that I saw was particularly at 8fit. We literally used two tools, which was Looker and Amplitude. And initially, we just had Amplitude. Amplitude is a pretty much web and app tracking tool, but it is pretty powerful because you can push all your front-end and back-end events, and it's very easy to track, and you have all the visualizations in there. So you have your conversion funnels, retention funnels. You can answer questions like, how is retention for people who engaged with this feature different from people who engaged with that feature? And you do all that without writing any SQL. You can do it within 30 seconds, and it just worked like magic. And when I came to Omio, I found that in the company, at the time we were using only Tableau, which required a lot of analysts to support it, to build dashboards, and you would have a lot of back and forth and resource allocation to create some kind of analytics. I quickly realized that this is a company which is much bigger than 8fit, and we spend so much more time talking about analytics and not actually doing it. So when I deployed Amplitude across the company and brought awareness to product managers and developers that this is the tool that you can use without writing any queries or doing anything extra, the results just started to take off. Like, you would see different people, different teams dropping their requests for analysts to support them to actually perform analytics themselves, which is pretty powerful. And then Looker is another tool. It's a BI tool where you can hook your different data sources. It's much more accurate than Amplitude. You can actually do reporting from Looker. Amplitude is more like Google Analytics. You wouldn't want to report on those numbers. But it requires a bit more effort and investment from the organization, but it is pretty powerful too. These are the two tools that I could personally recommend to have a look into and just experiment with it. I think Amplitude even has some free plan that you can play with. The second way how you can enable analytics organizationally is very basic, really. You can just do training. So you train your people. After you deployed your tools, you created this self-service environment. You just keep organizing formal trainings for people to see how to use it. And then you also do informal training by taking people who are heavy users of this self-service analytics and let them evangelize and be kind of role models of what is possible when you actually do this self-service analytics. And finally, you want to hire analytical minds. So you will usually find a very strong correlation between people who know their numbers of the past experiences, of what they were driving, and their performance in the future. So you want to be looking for that. And you want to ask future-looking questions like, if you were to implement this feature, what would you do? You want them, to cover analytics as one of the points, which would be a very strong indicator that these people will actually be succeeding. So this is how you enable your analytics environment organizationally. You set up self-service analytics, you train people, and you hire analytical minds. Finally, I would like to talk about some cases when analytics is not helpful. It's just worth mentioning that you don't want to obsess too much with numbers. So you don't want to look at very different things and trying to find patterns. You still want to start with a question, and you want to make sure that you're asking right questions, and then you find what is the most important metric for you, and then you unravel from there, how you can drive this metric and break it down into further granular metrics, adding different dimensions. This way you arrive to the right approach. And the second way is you don't want to overuse analytics or use analytics where you're not supposed to. You remember that data is evidence to support your actions, to fulfill certain goals. You don't want to replace goals with evidence. And one interesting example in our tech industry is our objective is to raise retention. And this is rather wrong statement. You don't want to raise retention. You want to make people love you so much that they're coming back, and you're going to measure it as with retention. So if you in e-commerce environment, you very often see web and app, and you would see app would have higher retention. So you can be quick to jump into conclusion, we should move all our traffic from web to app because we have higher retention there, so let's include this annoying banner on every web page because that's how we're going to drive it. But you need to think why you have higher retention on app. It might be because it's a self-fulfilling, so people download app because they like your web experience, so self-fulfillingly they will make more orders as a result. Or your experience on app can actually be much better, in which case you want to promote benefits on the app in a way that people would want to download it rather than annoy them. So don't substitute objectives or goals with numbers. Remember that humans or customers are not a number. They are people with needs. You still need to do the hard work to understand the needs and then apply the tool in the form of analytics to serve those needs efficiently. In conclusion, I will just reiterate that if you want to be successful, if you want to be good at what you're doing and you want to drive your career, you want to be a good analyst. If you want your organization to move faster, if you want to make your products fail less, and if you want your employees to have a lot more sense of direction, you want to enable or empower people organizationally using self-service analytics. And remembering Sherlock Holmes, just have data before you make any decision or jump into any actions. And that concludes my presentation. That's it.
You mentioned something interesting at the beginning. You say, essentially, your point was through self-service analytic, you can shift from people to people, like talks to people to machine, right? And you quoted an example of a meeting where people look at the chart, but they don't really know what happened there. Can you maybe elaborate a bit on that? Because I guess that people to people meeting will always be needed. So how we use data in a smart way for that purpose. Yeah.
So you will continue having people-to-people meetings, but you want to make those meetings as productive as possible. So you move them from thinking about things that could have been figured out to a more creative layer. In the example that I showed, when the chart goes down, what happened? If you use self-service analytics and you promote the analytical mindset, people who are responsible for that will know what happened that exact moment when this happened. So when you arrive to a meeting, you would usually know exactly what's going on in, say, which particular segment you have a problem and an idea what that problem could be, and then you discuss what could you possibly do about this problem. But today you see the chart for the first time, then it takes time to investigate it. You can pull an analyst who is busy with something else, and a week passes, and then you never really find out what's going on.
Hi, are you doing prediction?
Are we
Future?
So at Omio we don't do forecasting. So I don't personally do forecasting, and in product we don't do forecasting as much. It's more related to finance, and we don't have a very heavy operational unit either. So you would see forecasting in companies that have deep operations like food delivery, for example. And in that case, you would need specialized people who actually know more complicated techniques that I presented here. So you would normally call them data scientists who apply and do it there. And so this is already abstract. Like, this is more complicated evidence that you want to collect. Like, you need more complicated setup. What I'm trying to deliver here is we obsess a lot about things like machine learning and data science today, because as a humanity we made this leap that we already have something that is possible, but we forget that there's still basics, and you can't forget this basic. You still need to train and think about these basics, and this is the reason I want to bring awareness for that.
I would like to ask a question. Like, I have in my team, for example, many people, as you said, like to self-service analytics. So you're creating dashboards, but it's still like a lot of graphs, a lot of numbers. So it's like pie charts, like line charts. And then I was having a discussion with a colleague of mine of whether it would be better to like just simplify the data visualization in very like KPI numbers, or actually would be better maybe like try to get everyone to actually understand and look at the charts for themselves. But yeah, we don't know how to go if we just like get some very simple data visualization and just so they can actually see the numbers they are going for and then like how far they are, and that's it. Or should we just like actually keep all the data available and just like kind of train them to actually get the data for themselves and not just look at the numbers?
You need to separate reporting from insight. So you want to have one simple dashboard where you have as little KPIs as possible that you get obsessed about. Like, this is this is what you do. Like, you need that line to go up, or you need to get that line down, and then you figure out how you do it. Then to figure it out, you usually need insights, which you keep somewhere else, and that is where you go and play with different visualizations. You have your kind of sandbox that can be messy, and you play with it, but once you come to something that makes sense, you extract it from this mass of a sandbox and put it in a place, where all the KPIs are that matter.